Welcome to another episode, everyone. Lil Monk from Southside Compton Crip, Orlando Anderson's cousin, got into a fight and then he got killed. He was involved in the war after Tupac Shakur was murdered, and the back and forth there in Compton. Back in these days in Compton, there were a lot of dangerous individuals, still is of course, but there were a lot of dangerous individuals and the gang wars were going up. Lil Monk, well-known individual, strong individual, just like Orlando Anderson, just like his cousin. Again, both from Southside Compton Crip. Everyone was afraid of this individual. And then he got into this squabble and he ended up dead. If you know, you know. If you're from the streets, you really know what's going on. But check this out. This is Boys in the Hood TV. Shout out to Boys in the Hood TV. Let's find out what happened with Lil Monk from Southside Compton Crip.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Monk from the Southside Compton Crips. Now, Monk was born, Jerry Bonds, in April of 1976 in Compton, California. Now, he would be born into a large family, being cousins with Baby Lane Anderson, Freaky Dre, but also he was related to a future basketball star named Tayshaun Prince and his brother Thomas Prince. Now, like his cousin Orlando, Monk would be put on to the Southside Crips early on, and he would be heavy in the streets, gangbanging. Now, Monk would have a very close relationship with another Southside Crip named Lil Spanky. Now, although he wasn't the biggest guy, Monk had heart. He was known to squabble with anybody, and it was said that he had solid hands. But when it came to gunplay, he was with it and was a known rider for Southside. Now, after the death of Tupac in Las Vegas in September 1996, the streets of Compton would become a war zone, and Monk would be extremely active. Now, police at the time believed that Southside was responsible for this hit, specifically Baby Lane. Now, with this suspicion, they were monitoring the Southside Compton Crips extremely close. And on September 10th, police would get a tip that a Hispanic male was seen carrying a backpack full of guns to a duplex on Glencoe, directly in the Southside's hood. Now, this same informant would also state that he saw Lil Monk along with Baby Lane driving a brown car pulling up outside that duplex. Now, this particular duplex was owned by Big Spank from Southside. And this particular spot was a known safe house that had regular gang activity and dope dealing. Now, Compton PD would show up, and as they pulled up, they would spot Lil Monk coming outside the front door. Now, as soon as Monk spotted them, he would take off running because at the time, he did have a strap on him. Now, as Monk would head to the back running, he would take his gun out of his waist and toss it in the bushes. But only seconds later, he would be tackled to the ground by one of the officers. Now, police would arrest Lil Monk and take him down to the precinct. Now, as Monk was in custody, the other officers would walk inside the duplex and they would arrest 5 other Southside Compton Crips. Now, as they began to search the house, they would find an arsenal of weapons and ammunition with guns like AKs, Smith & Wessons, and also ski masks. Now, in one of the bedrooms in the duplex, they would find Baby Lane's high school diploma. Now, police would also collect a stack of photos from this duplex, which had members of Southside Compton Crips in them. Now, back at the precinct, police would begin to question Monk about what took place at that duplex. Now, during the questioning, they would pull out those same stack of photos which they found at the duplex, and they would start questioning him about the people on the photos. Now, Monk would identify everybody shown in the photos, but when they showed him a picture of Baby Lane, he would give them a fake name. Now, the police already knew who it was, but they wanted to see if Monk would identify him. But every time they asked, Monk would continue to give him a false name. But eventually, Monk would finally admit that it was Baby Lane in that photo. So police would then ask him why he lied about it. But Monk would respond that that was his cousin. Now, detectives believed that Monk was only trying to throw them off Baby Lane because he knew that Lane was a suspect in the murder of Tupac. Now, the following day, the police would be contacted by a known CI, and he would tell police that he saw 2 men from Southside Compton Crips driving a white Cadillac that matched the description of the car that was involved in the murder of Tupac. Now, he would state that he saw this only 2 days after the death of Tupac. And the 2 men that was inside this vehicle, he would identify as Lil Monk and Baby Lane, as he would claim that they were driving to an auto shop on Alondro Boulevard in Compton. Now, police would follow up on this lead, and they would drive to that auto shop, but once they arrived, there was no Cadillac in sight. Now, the police will come to the conclusion that they believe that Monk was taking the car there to be repaired after the shooting in Vegas. Now, ultimately, Monk would be charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Now, he would eventually bond out after being questioned by the police. But on October 10th, Lil Monk would be arrested yet again, this time while out in Long Beach. Now, he would be hit with burglary charges and attempted grand theft charges while being caught in the act of an offense. Now, this time he would be given no bail and he would remain in custody to face the new charges and his previous pending charges. Now, Monk will enter a plea of not guilty on both charges. Now, his prior charges would stem back from September for the 2 gun charges. One of them will be dismissed, but the other he will be convicted on and be sentenced to 180 days in county. But in regard to his burglary and attempted grand theft charges, he would take a plea deal. But instead of getting prison time, the judge would only sentence him to 3 years of probation, which would include requiring him to get a job and an improved home, which would meet the satisfactory of his probation officer. Now, in 1997, Monk, along with Baby Lane, would be sued in a wrongful lawsuit by Afeni Shakur, which was Tupac's mother, accusing both of them of being responsible for her son's death. Now, she believed that Monk was the driver of the white Cadillac that night that Tupac was murdered, although he was not considered a suspect by the police at the time. Now, even with his name being attached to this wrongful death suit, Monk would manage to stay out of trouble over the next few years, but only a year before completing his probation term.
Yeah, and this is why many people believe that the police were involved in Tupac Shakur's murder. They had all of these individuals as suspects, the police. They believe that they know what happened, the police. They said that the war in Compton that ensued after Tupac's murder was as a consequence of Tupac's death. So they believe that they know the whole story, the police. But yet they never did anything. They never made any arrests whatsoever, leading me to believe that perhaps these individuals were involved. They're saying now that Lil Monk was the driver of the white Cadillac, that he was the driver. I don't know. That's what the police are saying, though. But if you thought this, if you knew this, how come you never made a move? Unless you had a reason not to make a move, unless you were a part of it.
He would get bad news. On May 29th, 1998, his cousin Baby Lane was shot and killed in a shootout in Compton. Now, this news will be devastating to Monk and his family, especially with everything that was already going on in Compton due to the gang violence. Now, after Baby Lane's death, Southside Compton Crips and the Pocket Hood Crips were now deadly enemies, so Monk had to be on high alert at all times. But by 1999, Monk would manage to complete his probation. Now, as the 2000s rolled around, Monk would now be engaged to his girlfriend named Robin, who he had planned on marrying sooner than later. Now, of course, Monk was still out in the street hustling and making money with his homie Lil Spank to put food on the table. Now, at the time, Southern hip-hop was taking over the radio waves, and both Monk and Spank were big fans of the Hot Boys from Cash Money.
You know why y'all niggas say, whoa, they? Nigga, cause of me and Lil Monk, nigga. We used to listen to the Hot Boys, they from the South. So when you listen to the Hot Boys and all them other niggas, came up with the call. That's why you niggas saying, whoa, they, nigga.
But on the flip side, Monk's cousin, Freaky Dre, was preparing to launch his record label called Runoff Records. Now, shockingly, Dre, who was suspected of being in the vehicle the night Tupac was killed, was able to get Snoop Dogg on his debut album. Now, the fact that Snoop Dogg was close to Tupac at one point, it came to a big shock to many people that Snoop had no issues laying down a verse on his album.
Big bosses, 100,000 we tossin' up. Cheap faces, big butts, chunk 'em up.
Now, this compilation album would also include artists like Trey D and Goldie Lowe from the East Siders, and also Warren G, MC8, and a known Death Row affiliate by the name of Boss Hogg. Now, Dre had big plans to make this release a hit, so he decided to rent out the popular Latin club called the Condo Room on Wilshire to use that
on Wilshire, and there's a lot of dirt that goes on in the Hollywood area. People think that it's safe over there. Beverly Hills, Hollywood, Calabasas, not necessarily so. And we all have heard that Snoop Doggy Dogg indeed caught some heat for getting on the record with Dre, who, according to Keefy D, was in the car when Tupac was killed, was in the white Cadillac. Lil Monk was supposed to have been the driver, Baby Lane in there somewhere, Keefy D somewhere in there, Dre in there somewhere. In fact, they said that they handed Big Dre the weapon. He was scared to shoot it, so that's when the other individual took the weapon and shot. This is what Keefy D said. Not me. This is what he said.
this promo debut of his new record label. On Friday, October 18th, 2002, Freaky Dre party will be in full swing at the Conga Room, and it will be packed with over 200 people in attendance at this party. Now, also in attendance were artists from Def Jam Records. Now, the evening will go off without any issues, and everybody will be enjoying themselves, as Dre was the man of the hour, making his record label dreams come true. Now, eventually, Monk would show up to this party and link up with his cousin Dre and the rest of the Southside Compton Crips who were in attendance. But as the night went on, things would start to go bad. At around 11:40 p.m., an argument would break out amongst the partygoers in the upstairs hallway. Now, members of the Southside will get into an exchange with a few individuals that showed up at this party. Now, Monk was front and center in the midst of this exchange. Now, soon it would go from words to fists, and Monk would start firing off on one of the men he was arguing with. Now, it was said that Monk was maxing out this dude badly, just teeing off on him. Now, after knocking the individual to the ground, the man would pull out a pistol and open fire. Now, he would let off multiple shots as people began to scatter, and Monk would try to flee, but he would be hit and struck in the head. Now, the shooter would take off running, jumping down the stairs and running out the back door. But as he got out back, he would let off more shots at members of the Southside, and Freaky Dre will return fire, shooting at the suspect's car. Now, police were there on scene, but they were unsure who was doing the shooting. Now, soon EMTs would arrive in the midst of the chaos. Now, as partygoers would direct them upstairs, they would find Lil Monk laid out on the ground with a fatal gunshot wound to his head. And sadly, 26-year-old Jerry Bonds, aka Monk, he will be pronounced dead. Now, police would start their investigation, but no one was willing to come forward to identify who the shooter was or where he was from. And sadly, this case would eventually turn out to be a cold case because no one ever will be identified. But of course, the streets have their own justice, and the death of Monk will be answered. Now, Monk's mother was furious and felt that the Conga Room and Def Jam failed to provide adequate enough security for this event. And this will lead to her filing a wrongful death lawsuit. Now, Def Jam will counter, stating that this event was not sponsored by them whatsoever, only that they had artists in attendance. Now, Jennifer Lopez and Edward James Olmos were both named in his wrongful death lawsuit because they were both part owners. Now, as of today, no one was ever named in the murder of Monk from Southside. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in.
Yeah, and the lawsuit was not successful either. And, the streets, of course, the streets talk about all of these situations. And if you're from the area, if you're from the streets, then you know exactly what happened with all of these situations at the end of the day. And Lil Monk from Southside Compton Crip, rest in peace to him. He was a strong individual. He was involved in a lot of stuff out there. And, eventually he lost his life. He got into it with some individuals there, as we heard, inside of this club, party, or whatever it was. And then the individual ended up letting off shots. And this is what happens these days when you're squabbling and fighting. These individuals don't fight anymore. They're just going to pull out a weapon on you and use the weapon. But they had him as a suspect, along with Orlando Anderson, in the murder of Tupac Shakur. And yet, nothing was ever done. Again, just leading me to believe that perhaps some other sinister entities are involved in Tupac Shakur's murder. But rest in peace to Lil Monk. And, we have to be careful living this life on the street because it doesn't do any of us any good at the end of the day. That's why. That's it. That's it. There's nothing. It does not do any of us any good at the end of the day. We all end up like this, dead or in prison for the rest of our lives. No one leaves away successful. Look. Tupac and Biggie dead, and Suge and P. Diddy in prison. The ones who were in control of them, if you will, who ran the companies. It didn't end up well for either of them. Baby Lane is dead. Orlando Anderson, his cousin's dead too. Keefy D's on trial fighting for his life. They're trying to kill him. Who has been successful in the end living this life? No one. Let me know what you think in the comments. Rest in peace, brother. Stay safe and stay free, people.